Well, this is going to end our series, Summer in the Sand. And I got to say, I've been so impressed by the creativity of my colleagues in weaving this theme of sand into their messages. We've heard how Moses tried to bury a body in the sand. We've seen how people try to make their life a castle in the sand. We have seen a foolish man try to build his house on the sand. And last week, Joe talked about how the Apostle Paul slammed his boat into a sandbar. And today, I want to say a few kind things about good old sand. Zach Brown has got this song about how good it is to sink your toes, among other things, in the sand. And sometimes maybe you have some treasured memories about walking along with someone you love barefoot on a strip of sand. And there's something about the waves in the background, the crashing of the waves, your words stay close, and it sometimes can feel like it's just the two of you as the only people in the whole world. And it's easy to meet heart to heart while you're walking on the sand. Matter of fact, a few years ago, my daughter Jessica got the surprise of her life when she was walking on the sand in Santa Cruz, California. Her then boyfriend, Bill, had prearranged with his buddies to set something up in a little inlet there and that they would just happen across this scene. And they did. And Jessica saw it and she said, "Uh-oh, Bill, looks like somebody's going to do something romantic. We better get out of here." And he fell to one knee and said, "Yep, they sure are. Will you marry me?" And she said yes. But as you think about that scene, it reminds me of a scene that takes place centuries earlier in the Gospels as Jesus is walking along the sand next to his friend Peter. And he turns to Peter and he says, "Do you love me?" And just as Jessica's life was never the same after she said yes to that question, in the same way Peter's life was never the same, nor will your life ever be the same if you answer yes to the question that Jesus is asking you and me this morning, and that is, do you love me? So let's take a stroll with Jesus next to the shore at the Sea of Galilee in John, the 21st chapter, verses 1 through 17. We read, "Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples, 7 in all, were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them. And they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got in the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Well, Simon Peter, say hello to the most colorful character in the Gospels. You have heard that Jesus' disciples did a lot of dumb things. 85% of the stupid things were done by Simon Peter. And we see a little glimpse of one right here. It says, when he found out it was the Lord, what does he do? It says he put on his clothes and jumped into the water. I mean, don't normal people take their clothes off before they jump into the water? But see, that was Peter. You act first and you think later. Peter One moment it's, Lord, I will swear on a stack of Bibles 1,000 miles high, I will never ever leave you or forsake you. Those other losers will drop you in a moment, but you're lucky you have me. And then just a few nights later, Peter gets intimidated by a servant girl in a courtyard next to a fire and even throws in a few cuss words. For God's sake, lady, I never saw this man ever in my entire life. In Gethsemane, Jesus begs Peter to be his prayer partner. And Jesus looks over a few minutes later and Peter's sleeping, snoring. And then later, guess who's carrying a concealed weapon? And Jesus says, Peter, put that sword away. So do you see a pattern? Erratic, impulsive. But it's more than just poor judgment. Peter is deeply flawed in character. The guy is obsessed with making himself look better than the other people around him. In an org chart of his mind, it's sort of Jesus CEO, then there's a line, and then Peter COO, and then all these losers down here. I remember reading a sports writer once said that Reggie Jackson, the baseball player, said was a hot dog that all the mustard in the world could not cover. Peter was that hot dog. When my daughter was in law school, she used to complain about a student. She said, that guy's such a gunner. He's such a gunner in law school. And I said, what's a gunner? She said, it's a student who does everything they can to outshine the other students in front of the professor. And that was Peter. Peter would have loved it if the Broadway musical had been Simon Peter Superstar. We're fascinated by Peter, aren't we? He's the one that we tend to always be drawn toward. Could it be that there's a little Simon Peter in every one of us here? Can you say, Ich bin ein Peter? David Brooks, who's a writer for the New York Times, really would say that we ought have some Simon Peter in us. And here's the way he says it. He says that we spend our time obsessing on our resume virtues. And our resume virtues are the things that help you acquire power and wealth and status and prestige and professional accomplishment. But he says at the same time, though, just beneath the surface, we're really insecure, just like Peter. And we have self-doubts, and we're always trying to win approval and seek approval from other people, even as we try to manipulate them as pawns to help us get ahead. And so what David Brooks says is what we've got to do is to stop focusing so much on our resume virtues, which are shallow, and instead, he said, in life, we grow by focusing on what he calls our eulogy values, which are those things that you hope people say about you someday when you die, when it's not going to matter whether you got a big house or whether you got a fat bank account, but what's going to matter, was I faithful and loving and kind and generous? And so one of the most important questions you can ask in your life is, how do I move in my life from focusing on resume values to eulogy values? How do I go from ego to others? How do I go from taking selfies to taking Gaudis, if you will? And for Peter, his growth takes place in 4 stages that God leads him through. The first stage is God lets Peter fail. Out there in that boat, Peter's got his head in his hands, and he, when the ships were down and it mattered, Peter, he failed. He failed totally. He broke his oath of loyalty to his friend Jesus by denying he even knew Jesus. There's a scene in the play, A Man for All Seasons, where Sir Thomas More is tempted to break a vow that he's made to the church by allowing the divorce of King Henry. And he says to his daughter, when a man takes a vow, Meg, it's as if he pours himself into his own hands like water. And if you spread your fingers then, there's no use looking for yourself. You're gone. And Peter spread his fingers, and Peter is gone. Peter is lost out there in that boat. His heart is as empty as his nets. He is a hollow shell. So much so that there are those who believe that explains the resurrection. This is fascinating. There is a liberal German theologian named Gerd Ludemann who believes there is no risen Jesus in this scene we just read, that this whole thing is an hallucination by Peter. Here's what he writes. He says, the risen Christ that appeared to the Apostle Peter was a subjective vision produced by Peter's overwhelming guilt and grief for having denied Jesus. Now let's think about that for a moment. And let me just give you full disclosure. I have had, as a pastor through the years, after I've done a service, a memorial service for somebody, I have had a loved one of that person in the days afterwards come to me and say, Vic, I saw them. I saw her. I saw her in the living room. She was sitting in her favorite chair. And she smiled at me and she said, it's okay. Don't worry. I'm fine. And I'll even tell you, we had just recently that experience in my own family. We lost a beloved nephew in 2010, Brandon, and his birthday was yesterday. And so we've been thinking a lot about it. Last week, my wife, Becky, had a dream that was so vivid that afterwards, she told me, she said, Vicky, it was like I was talking with Brandon. He was teasing me just like he always did. And I woke up and his presence was in the room so much I expected fully to see him there. And it was so real. And sometimes God gives us these God winks. But how do we know that was not what experienced? It was the experience that we call the resurrection of Jesus. I'll tell you how we know that. And that is this: never in history has there been a confirmed case of a group hallucination. Think for a moment. Jesus had 11 appearances that took place over 40 days to a total of more than 500 people. And all it would have taken is 3 or 4 of those people to back off what they had said previously and say, I think we really were probably tripping on something. Or, you know what, maybe it was a foggy day and maybe I didn't see what I really thought I had saw. If you just had 4 or 5 people say that would have ended Christianity even before it began. But in this scene that you have here with these 7 disciples, did you know that only one of those disciples died of old age, and that was John? And every one of those other disciples later died as martyrs for their belief that they met the physical, risen Jesus and even ate fish with him as they walked there along the shore there on the Sea of Galilee. And what's more, there's a Duke professor named Reynolds Price who says this scene that we've just read has all of the details of a remembered event. For example, beginning with that goofy thing Peter did where he puts his clothes on and jumped in, that's the kind of thing someone looks at and goes, that's really dumb. I'm going to remember that. And they wrote it down. Other details. Did you notice how far was a boat from the shore? 100 yards from the shore, it said. How many fish did they catch? 153. It wasn't just a fire. It was a charcoal fire. See, clearly somebody remembered and they wrote it down and we have it. Meanwhile, they fish all night. They catch nothing. Been there, done that, right? And then in the morning, they hear a voice that cuts through the fog and says, "Do you catch any fish?" These unprintable things are shouted back. No way, no. And then the voice says, well, then try the other side. They figure, what do we got to lose? They pull in the net. They're throwing the net out the other side. They're letting it out. When all of a sudden, it's as their arms almost get jerked out of their sockets. Wham! So many fish. Whereupon Peter pulls another classic stunt. He lets go. Thanks, Peter. And the next sound you hear is splash, as Peter hits the water and he's swimming to shore. That is the next step for Peter. First, God lets him fail. Next, Jesus draws him with irresistible grace. To me, this is the most fascinating part of this whole story, and that is this. The disciples here in this scene must have felt like they were in the movie Groundhog Day, because everything they were going through, they had been through before. This is deja vu all over again. In Luke 5, the disciples are in the boat. In John 21, the disciples are in the boat. In Luke 5, they fish all night, catch nothing. John 21, they fish all night, they catch nothing. Luke 5, Jesus says, try one more time. John 21, Jesus says, try one more time. In Luke 5, they catch a fish. In Luke 21, they catch a fish. Only in Luke 5, instantly after that happens, Simon Peter looks at Jesus and Peter says, depart from me, for I am a sinful man. Now, in both of these cases, one thing is evident, says Tim Keller, and that is that to meet Jesus is overwhelming. In neither of these stories is it about the fish. Now, the disciples don't go, we're rich, look at all these fish, or Son of God, how do you do that? When you meet Jesus, one of two things happens, he says. Either you are repulsed or you're reeled in. And in Luke 5, Peter is repulsed. He goes, get away from me. I don't want you here. And why is that? It's because Peter's not yet a Christian. He just met Jesus. And up until now, Peter has been his own God. This is a little bit like impersonating a police officer. And it may shock you if you haven't heard this before, but we have a fund where we buy a $100,000 life insurance policy on every Atlanta police officer, 2,000 of them. So you ask any police officer in Atlanta, and they'll say, yeah, there's this church that has bought a life insurance policy, and it's something we do for our men, women, and blue. And I won't go into why we do that, but it's an amazing, beautiful story. But I go to a lot of police functions. I'm a friend with Chief Turner and all that. Suppose I have that all go to my head and I decide, you know what? I'm going to start impersonating a police officer. I'll tell you where I'd really love to do it is on the connector in gridlock. Wouldn't it be your fantasy come true to be able to reach behind you and pull out a big red light, put it on top of your car, turn that baby on, swing out onto the shoulder, boom, you'd shoot up through Midtown. Probably wouldn't even need a siren. You just have that big old thing going. Or out here, people run our red light, pull them over. In other words, I would love impersonating a police officer. I would fear nothing being a police officer until one thing happened. What? Another police officer shows up, a real one. And I'd go, depart from me. I'm a fraud. I know I'm a fraud. It's really fun being your own God, making your own rules, playing by your own way, playing God, until the real God shows up. And that's what happened. Peter, depart from me. I'm Christian. But something amazing has happened. That was Luke 5. Something amazing has happened to Peter that makes everything different in John 21. It's the same scene. It's the disciples in the boat. They didn't catch any fish. All of a sudden, Jesus says, try it again. They catch all these fish. And what happens now? In John 21, when that happens, Peter sprints across the deck, over the planks, goes airborne, splash, hits that water, and like a madman, he flails that water to get to Jesus as fast as he can go. Do you see the difference? In Luke 5, it's I can't get away from you fast enough. And in John 21 is I can't get close to you soon enough. And what makes it strange in John 21 is that Peter has just sinned mightily against Jesus. And yet somehow that failures, this seems to even empower him more just to flail even harder to try to get to Jesus quickly. And what's happened is he's now a believer. He understands the irresistible grace of Jesus. There are two ways to get to heaven, you see. The first way is the performance plan. You earn it. That means you do everything right. You always say the right thing. You, in every situation, do what is loving for your whole life. And it's like in baseball, if they change the rules, and to get into the Hall of Fame in baseball, you had to play error-free ball and bat 1,000 for your entire career. John Smoltz, for example, he had to pitch perfect games, 27 batters and no more for his entire career, and then he would be able to get into the Hall of Fame. If that were the case, how many people would be in Cooperstown today, right? 0. And the same is true for us when it comes to getting ahead of it. If it's the performance plan. I was reading a study the other day that the average person cannot speak 10 minutes without telling some form of a lie, stretching the truth in some way. And so it's hopeless for us. And so what God has done, he's come up with a grace plan. And he says, trust Jesus. Have a relationship with him who says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And suddenly now it's no longer my righteousness. It's about his righteousness. And if this morning you're trying to make it into heaven based on your performance, man, you're being way too hard on yourself. And today you can, right here, turn in your badge and stop impersonating God. And you don't even have to hide your brokenness or your failures any longer. You can just run across the deck and go like this and dive in and swim and come to Jesus and be with him. Let him grace draw you in. Well, standing there before the charcoal fire, there's Jesus. He's holding the spatula. He says, let's have breakfast. They have breakfast. And then after breakfast, what's hanging in the air is the unfinished business between Jesus and Peter. And so Jesus says, Peter, let's go for a walk. And now comes the third step along the way. Peter has been allowed to fail. He has been drawn in by grace. And now Jesus makes Peter answer the big question. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And here comes some more pain for Peter. Now, notice he doesn't go into Peter's behavior. He doesn't say, Peter, why'd you chicken out? Peter, why were you such a wuss that night? And why did you deny me that night? No, he simply asked this one question. He cuts right to the core issue. Peter, do you love me? And the answer is Peter did not love Jesus. Peter loved Peter. And so he says, Peter, are you wildly crazy passionate for me? And Peter can only say, I care about you. And again, Jesus says, are you wildly crazy passionate for me? Peter says, I care about you. Think about it for a moment. No matter how you have failed God in your life, God comes to you today and he doesn't say, are you sorry? He doesn't say, what are you going to do to make up for that swath of destruction that you've left behind you in life. Or he doesn't say, do you promise never to do it again? He simply asks you this one question, and it's so important that he asks you 3 times. He says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Can you imagine a spouse who's been dragged through the mud and betrayed, and they come to you and they say, listen, do you love me? And all you can say is, I care about you. And they say, close enough. I'll take that. My love is big enough for both of us. Welcome home, Peter, is what Jesus says. And then comes the 4th thing. Jesus says, now, Peter, here's your next assignment. Feed my lambs. Peter, do you love me? Feed my lambs. In other words, the way you express your vertical love for God is through loving horizontally his people, his lambs, especially his little people, the vulnerable and the weak. If you've ever been on a farm, you know that when you feed a lamb, you don't get a lot of goodies. You feed a dog and they suddenly make you their deity, right? They follow you around. Cats will rub against you and they'll purr and all this. But for a lamb, it's just like glassy stare. It's by loving people who can't love you back that you truly express your love for Jesus. Maybe you're a mom and you're taking care of bratty little kids all day long, or maybe you're a teacher who has an impossible class, or maybe you're caring for a mom or dad who has Alzheimer's. Isn't it interesting that we come to Jesus with our sin and he doesn't just forgive us, he empowers us to be better than we've ever been before. We think he's going to give us sort of a plan B since we failed, and instead he promotes us to become a shepherd of other people, because suddenly now we're deeper and stronger and wiser because of his grace. And yeah, Peter, eventually his dreams come true and he gets to be the leader of the early church. In fact, if you're reading this in the Bible, this very chapter, all you got to do is flip the page, and suddenly the next page is the book of Acts, where Peter goes from being this sniveling coward, and all of a sudden he becomes this spiritual King Kong who leads the church through the book of Acts and even dies a hero's death, crucified upside down on a cross. And so in the end, failure and brokenness is no impediment to greatness. But in the end, greatness is going to wind up looking something very different from what you thought it was when you started out. It's not going to be resume virtues. It's going to wind up being those eulogy virtues, deep virtues. Let me close with a story by Henry Nouwen. He tells a story about a little river. The little river said, I can become a big river. It worked hard, but there was a big rock. The river said, I'm going to get around this rock. The little river pushed, and since it had a lot of strength, it got itself around the rock. Soon the river faced a big wall, and the river kept pushing this wall. Eventually, the river made a canyon and carved its way through the wall. The growing river said, I can do it. I can push it. I'm not going to let myself down for anything. Then there was an enormous forest. The river said, I'm going to go ahead anyway and just force those trees down, and the river did. The river, now powerful, stood on the edge of an enormous desert with the sun beating down. The river said, I'm going to go through this desert. But the hot sand soon began to soak up the whole river. The river said, oh no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get myself through this desert. But the river soon had drained into the sand until only it was a small mud pool. Then the river heard a voice from above. Just surrender. Let me lift you up. Let me take over. The river said, here I am. The sun then lifted up the river and made the river into a huge cloud. He carried the river over the desert and let the cloud rain down and make the fields far away fruitful and rich. You and I are like that river, and we're like Peter, and we sometimes say, look out, world, here I come. You get in my way, I'm going to mow you down. But there comes the moment when you hit your desert, and you always will, and you say, I don't know what to do. And it feels like dying. But at that moment, you hear a voice above, and it says, let go. Surrender. Just love me, and I will make you fruitful. And so tomorrow morning, the question you should ask is not, how many people can I impress today? Or how many things can I get done on my to-do list? It should be, how can I surrender my all to God so he can use me? Where can I give myself away for others? And my prayer for you is that God would lift you up, that he would carry you across your desert and make you a blessing, just like he did Peter.